The morning Cassandra Lawrence was found dead, Mill Haven changed forever. The beloved teacher with the radiant smile and perfect life was gone, leaving behind a town gripped by shock, sorrow, and questions no one dared to voice aloud. At first, it seemed like a tragedy, a heartbreaking accident that had stolen one of Mill Haven's brightest. But tragedy has a way of exposing cracks beneath the surface, and soon, those cracks began to widen. Whispers spread through the streets, quiet at first, then growing louder. Cassandra's death wasn't as simple as it seemed. Whispers told of an affair, with quiet suspicion pointing to two names: Dominic, Cassandra's husband, and Jessica, her estranged sister. What secrets had Cassandra taken to the grave? And who in Mill Haven might be desperate to keep them buried? Cassandra's death wasn't just an ending. It was the spark that would ignite the town's deepest fears. Behind every closed door and polite smile, something darker was waiting to be uncovered. The perfect image of Mill Haven was about to shatter, and no one would escape the fallout. For years, Jessica Lawrence had been a ghost in her own story, leaving Mill Haven behind as if running from a crime scene. Now, with the town's skyline stretching before her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't returning by choice, but by fate. Jessica Lawrence came back to Mill Haven like a storm, carrying only a battered suitcase and the weight of her past mistakes. The town hadn't changed, but Jessica had, her life scattered with broken promises and reckless choices. She appeared on Cassandra's doorstep without warning, hoping for shelter from her latest disaster. Cassandra, with her steady loyalty, couldn't turn her away. But Jessica's presence was like fuel in a fire, a spark that set the household on edge. Her wild energy clashed with Cassandra's calm, creating an unsettling tension. Jessica's carefree spirit, her bohemian clothes, her sly laughter, all of it felt out of place yet impossible to ignore. Dominic noticed. He couldn't help it. Jessica's eyes lingered a bit too long, her laughter a beat too loud, every glance a carefully aimed spark. And Dominic, caught off guard, felt the thrill he'd been missing. Jessica saw it too, and she played on it. Every look, every smile carefully calculated to pull him closer. Cassandra sensed something was off, but she couldn't quite grasp it. Jessica's playful facade masked a dark intention, an undercurrent of danger that Cassandra, for all her strength, couldn't see. The household balance shifted, each interaction a step closer to the point of no return. Jessica's intentions sharpened with a dark clarity, her gaze cold and calculating, like a predator closing in. What started as casual glances and light touches transformed into a meticulously orchestrated seduction, each gesture crafted to draw Dominic further in, loosening his loyalty with unrelenting precision. Her initial moves were understated, a lingering smile, a question that revealed an intimate knowledge of his work, a compliment perfectly timed to feed his craving for admiration and validation. Dominic found himself caught, astonished by how Jessica saw the parts of him his own wife had overlooked. In her eyes, he saw a mirror reflecting all the desires he'd buried deep, a living reminder of everything he felt was missing. Cassandra was stability, his anchor in a steady life. But Jessica was a spark, a consuming fire he hadn't felt in years. What started as a kindness toward his wife's troubled sister had twisted into something dangerous. Jessica's patience was as chilling as it was meticulous. She slipped into the role of confidant, listening with unwavering focus as he shared his frustrations and dreams. Her gaze was magnetic, her presence addictive. Each late-night exchange and stolen glance pulled Dominic deeper into her web. His vulnerabilities were exposed, raw wounds that Jessica exploited with surgical precision, slicing through his defenses as if she'd known his weaknesses all along. Soon his guilt was nothing more than a faint whisper, easily drowned out by the thrill of her touch and the promise in her eyes. A promise of danger, of freedom, of something forbidden. Against his better judgment, he let himself fall, entranced by Jessica's dark allure. Each lingering look and every whispered word pulled him deeper into an intoxicating whirlpool of betrayal. As the affair spiraled, Dominic's once steady moral compass shattered under the weight of desire and deceit. He was helpless, even as a voice warned of the looming destruction. Jessica mercilessly exploited his weakness, feeding off his inner turmoil with a satisfaction hidden behind every sultry smile and intimate gesture. The affair quickly spun out of control. Late-night work sessions became his alibi, secret meetings his new routine. His loyalty to Cassandra was obliterated by his obsession with Jessica. But what Dominic didn't see was that Jessica's interest was rooted not in love, but in conquest, a twisted pleasure in dismantling her sister's life. She reveled in the chaos, finding power in the destruction of Cassandra's perfect world and the control she held over him. Beneath her playful facade, something dark lurked, a venomous resentment born from years of rivalry and jealousy. Each touch and smile was another thread in a web that would inevitably ensnare them all, a deliberate trap laid with cold precision. Dominic, blinded by desire, failed to see the darkness in Jessica's game. He believed their connection was real, that she understood him in ways no one else could. But he was nothing more than a pawn, caught in the coils of Jessica's twisted plan, a plan that would end in devastation. Their affair, once a mere spark, had erupted into an inferno that neither could contain. They hurtled toward disaster, and though the storm was still on the horizon, its rumble grew louder each day. The line between thrill and obsession was gone, as was the boundary between attraction and ruin. Each step drew them deeper, binding them to a fate neither was willing or able to escape. For weeks, an uneasy feeling clawed at Cassandra. She couldn't shake it, couldn't explain it, but something felt off. Dominic, once steady and predictable, seemed distant now. He was quieter, slipping into silence during meals and avoiding her gaze. His laughter, once warm, now felt hollow, like he was forcing himself through each moment. The change was subtle, but undeniable, casting a shadow over their once stable life. It started with small things. Dominic began coming home later than usual, brushing off his absences with vague excuses, extra work, meeting with friends. But Cassandra knew her husband. She sensed his detachment, that look of distraction in his eyes he tried so hard to hide. Each excuse seemed thinner than the last, fueling a frustration she could barely contain. She told herself it was nothing. But as the days wore on, her doubt grew darker, more insistent. Then the small signs started piling up. A matchbook from a hotel she didn't recognize, stuffed into his coat pocket. The faint scent of perfume on his shirt, one she didn't own. A text notification he quickly swiped away, his face shifting with an expression he couldn't hide. Each detail felt like a puzzle piece falling into place, one she didn't want to complete. With each passing day, Cassandra's suspicions sharpened, her mind replaying every strange interaction, every lingering glance. She noticed how Jessica's laughter seemed to draw Dominic in, how his gaze lingered when she entered the room. Her own sister's presence felt like a threat she couldn't ignore. Was Jessica really here for a fresh start? Or had Cassandra allowed her into their lives only to watch her tear it apart? One night, when the weight of it all became unbearable, Cassandra slipped out of bed and crept downstairs. Her hands shook as she moved, but she couldn't stop. She needed the truth. She felt almost numb as she rifled through Dominic's belongings, her breath quickening as her fingers finally closed around his phone. The messages were right there, messages from Jessica. Simple words, carefully chosen, but filled with unmistakable meaning. I miss our talks. Last night was unforgettable. Each message was like a slap to her face, cutting through her hopes and shattering everything she'd believed about her marriage. Her mind reeled as she read, the truth sinking in with brutal clarity. Her husband had betrayed her. Her sister had crossed an unthinkable line. They had both deceived her, and now there was no escape from this betrayal. In that moment, Cassandra felt a flood of anger, disbelief, and sorrow, a mix so strong it left her breathless. Her world had shattered in an instant, her life reduced to nothing more than lies. But amid the torrent of emotions, a strange calm settled over her. She wouldn't scream, wouldn't break. She wanted answers. She wanted them to feel the weight of the hurt they had caused her. As dawn crept through the windows, Cassandra made her decision. She would confront them both. This pain deserved more than a tear-filled breakdown. It deserved reckoning. She would face them, force them to acknowledge the destruction they had caused. There would be no turning back. With the morning light came a chilling realization. The life she had known, the trust she had cherished, it was gone, shattered beyond repair. And in that moment she knew, nothing would ever be the same again. Cassandra waited until the house was dark, her resolve sharpening like a blade. The betrayal sat heavy within her, unrelenting, like poison seeping through her veins. Days of uncovering lies and watching her life unravel had left her numb, a cold rage hardening her sorrow into something unbreakable. That evening, she stood silently as Dominic and Jessica entered the room, feeling like a stranger in her own home. The tension pressed against her skin, an invisible force ready to shatter. Cassandra's gaze was unflinching, every movement measured, her silence saying what words never could. Her quiet revelation hung in the room, a deadly stillness settling around them. She knew they felt her rage without her having to say a word. Dominic looked pale, the shame written plainly on his face, while Jessica's indifference was chilling, a calm mask that hinted at something even darker. In her sister's eyes, Cassandra saw no remorse, no hesitation, only satisfaction, as if this destruction had been her goal all along. Every piece of evidence, every late-night discovery flashed through Cassandra's mind. She could feel the depth of their betrayal, a betrayal woven into each act of kindness she'd once offered, now twisted into a weapon against her. Jessica had not just taken her husband, she had dismantled every foundation Cassandra had once trusted, a deliberate and cruel conquest. A torrent of pain, anger, and disbelief swirled within her, so consuming that it left her trembling. She felt herself pulled toward a dark clarity. There was no love, no loyalty left to salvage. The life she had built was nothing more than a lie, shattered beyond repair. Without another glance, Cassandra turned, leaving behind the wreckage of her marriage and family. She found herself stumbling into the cold night, the shock and pain morphing into a relentless drive to escape. The truth had carved deep, and she wanted nothing more than to outrun it. Hours slipped away in the haze of a dark bar, the confrontation replaying over and over in her mind, each moment sharper, more unbearable. Her life as she knew it was gone, reduced to an ache that seemed endless. When she finally stepped back into the night, Cassandra's world felt cold, desolate, an empty shell of what had once been her home. The car ride was a blur, her hands gripping the wheel, mind clouded with grief and fury. She drove blindly, the weight of betrayal pressing harder with each mile. But in the distance, fate waited, dark and unyielding, a final consequence she could neither foresee nor escape. The night was cold, the darkness around her car thick and suffocating. Cassandra gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her heart pounding as she tore down the winding cliffs outside Mill Haven. Each curve loomed out of nowhere, sharper, more dangerous, but she barely noticed. Her mind was tangled in a fog of betrayal, anger, and heartache, drowning out the quiet warnings inside her. Dominic's hollow excuses, Jessica's cold indifference, each memory seared through her, flashing like broken glass. Her foot pressed harder on the gas, the engine snarling as the car surged forward. She wasn't just fleeing the town. She was fleeing the wreckage of her own life, the shattered trust, the pain that had swallowed her whole. Her vision blurred, tears mingling with the haze of alcohol. The road ahead twisted into darkness, a series of blind curves and steep drops, but she barely registered them. She didn't see the cliff edge looming close to her right, hidden in the shadowed night. Then it happened. A swerve too sharp to recover from, her car veering wildly. Her hands gripped the wheel, panic slicing through the fog, but it was too late. The tires skidded, screaming against the pavement, and the car lurched, smashing through the guardrail in a brutal instant. The metal groaned and shattered, and her scream pierced the night. Sharp, desperate, cut off as her car plunged into the abyss. For one excruciating heartbeat, there was silence, as if the world held its breath. Then gravity took hold, yanking her car down the cliffside. The vehicle tumbled, slamming into jagged rocks, each impact a brutal reminder of how quickly everything had fallen apart. When it finally stopped, The wreckage lay scattered at the bottom of the ravine, broken and still. Only the faint sound of shattered glass and twisted metal settling broke the silence, an eerie echo that lingered in the empty darkness. By morning, the town of Millhaven would know of Cassandra's death, a tragic accident, or so it would appear. But with the morning would come questions, quiet whispers that hinted at a deeper, darker story hidden beneath the surface. For now, though, the night held its secret. Cassandra's life, her pain, her betrayal, all swallowed by the shadows at the base of the cliffs, buried in the silent, unforgiving depths below. The next morning, Millhaven was shaken by the news of Cassandra Lawrence's untimely death. Her car, twisted and mangled beyond recognition, had been discovered at the base of the cliff. Cassandra, a woman who seemed to have everything, was gone. And for some, the story didn't sit right. Detective Sarah Watson arrived at the scene, her instincts immediately alert. Known for her meticulous eye and unyielding dedication, she couldn't shake the feeling that this accident was anything but. Something about it gnawed at her, a subtle wrongness lingering in the cold morning air. She scanned the scene, taking in the broken guardrail and the faint tire tracks leading off the edge. Why had Cassandra been on this dangerous road alone in the dead of night? As Sarah traced Cassandra's final steps, a troubling picture began to emerge. The bartender had last seen her downing drink after drink, lost in her own despair. But when Sarah studied the crash site, there were unsettling clues. The lack of skid marks was the first red flag, hinting that Cassandra hadn't tried to stop. Then there were her injuries. Despite the violent fall, her body showed no signs of bracing for impact. It was as if she had given up, resigned to whatever awaited her below. When Sarah began speaking with those closest to Cassandra, the polished image of her life started to unravel. Friends described her as tired, distracted, even haunted in recent weeks. Some hinted at problems at home, a distant husband who had grown more evasive and preoccupied. But no one had dared to ask more, unwilling to disturb the image of the perfect Lawrence family. Then the rumors began to surface, murmurs of an affair. Whispers spread of a dark betrayal involving Jessica, Cassandra's own sister, and Dominic, her husband. Sarah could feel the shock ripple through the townspeople, their reactions visceral, as they realized the extent of the deception that had taken place right in their midst. She too felt the bitterness. How could two people who should have been Cassandra's closest allies betray her so deeply? With grim determination, Sarah pursued this new lead. Dominic, now sullen and reserved, tried to act as if he were grieving, but Sarah could see through the cracks, his carefully chosen words, the calculated pauses. His grief seemed hollow, more a performance than an expression of true sorrow, and the unease in his eyes hinted at secrets he was desperate to keep buried. Jessica, however, was less guarded. Her eyes darted as soon as Cassandra's name was mentioned, and her voice turned flat, cold. She spoke of her sister with a clipped, almost dismissive tone, as though erasing Cassandra's memory with every word. Sarah could sense it, a simmering resentment, a jealousy that had brewed for years, twisting Jessica's perception of her own sister. Piece by piece, Sarah began to see the twisted web of betrayal that had ensnared Cassandra. It was a story of lies, of passion warped into obsession, and of loyalty shattered by selfish desires. Millhaven was now left with the remnants of this tragedy, the pristine image of the Lawrence family forever tainted. The deeper Sarah delved, the clearer it became that Cassandra's death was no simple accident. Dominic and Jessica's affair had fractured her life, leaving her stranded in a spiral of despair that had ultimately led her to the edge of that cliff. Whether they had pushed her intentionally or not, their actions had undoubtedly driven her to that dark, winding road. As Sarah prepared her report, a heavy sense of injustice settled over her. Cassandra hadn't just lost her life, she'd lost her dignity, her trust, and everything she had once held dear. Now her tragedy would leave a scar on Millhaven, a haunting reminder of how love, twisted by deceit and betrayal, could lead to such a devastating end. Millhaven was never the same after Cassandra's tragic death. The once pristine image of the Lawrence family lay in ruins, their secrets exposed like raw wounds for all to see. Whispers of betrayal and heartbreak rippled through the town, seeping into the quiet corners of every diner, echoing in the aisles of the grocery store. Jessica and Dominic, once respected and admired, were now cast as villains, tainted by scandal and haunted by a guilt they could not escape. For Jessica, life became a prison of isolation. She had once thrived on attention, the center of every gathering, basking in the warmth of admiration. But now, even the friends she'd known for years could hardly bear to look at her. The same people who once showered her with praise now turned away with looks of disgust. She could feel their judgment, see the contempt in their eyes. Family members whispered of betrayal and shame, refusing to even speak her name. Jessica roamed the streets of Mill Haven like a ghost, her once vibrant presence reduced to a shadow, her life marked by the stain of her own choices. Dominic's world was crumbling too, but in different ways. Once celebrated as a skilled architect, he had been a man of respect, his reputation solid. Now, colleagues avoided him, their admiration turned to silent disdain. Clients canceled projects without a word, and the work he'd once taken pride in was slipping away, piece by painful piece. Dominic felt the weight of Cassandra's absence grow heavier each day, filling his once ordered life with an emptiness he couldn't escape. His name, once spoken with respect, now carried only whispers of scandal, his legacy tainted by the choices he'd made. Bound by their shared guilt, Jessica and Dominic found themselves slowly drifting apart. The affair that had once felt thrilling now lay like a bitter aftertaste, each memory a reminder of what they had destroyed. They rarely spoke, and when they did, the words felt hollow, burdened by the life they'd shattered for a fleeting taste of something forbidden. Jessica retreated further into herself, seeking refuge in isolation, while Dominic faced the stony silence of his peers, trapped in a life that no longer resembled his own. In the eyes of Mill Haven, their punishment was clear. Jessica and Dominic would bear the weight of Cassandra's death, their guilt branded upon them, not by law, but by the cold, unforgiving judgment of their community. Each time they walked through town, they felt it. The cold stares, the whispers that never ceased. It was as though Cassandra's spirit lingered in every shadow, her presence haunting them, a reminder of all they had lost and all they had destroyed. The town had no sympathy left for them, only a relentless sense of justice. No judge, no jury, only the quiet sentence passed by the people who had once been their friends, their neighbors. Mill Haven had turned its back, casting Jessica and Dominic into lives of solitude, forever marked by the tragedy they had sown. In every silent glance, every closed door, they felt Cassandra's ghost trailing behind them, a reminder that some betrayals never fade and some wounds never heal. For Mill Haven, the tale of Cassandra's tragic demise became more than a scandal. It was a cautionary tale etched into the town's memory. Even the smallest betrayals, people learned, could cast shadows far and wide, leaving a mark on everyone who had once known the Lawrence family. The story of Cassandra's fall became a silent lesson, a story passed down with quiet reverence, a reminder that sometimes the darkest tales come not from distant places, but from our own backyards. If this story left you as haunted as it left us, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love, betrayal, and deadly secrets. Because sometimes, even the quietest towns hold the darkest stories.